So I'm going to talk today about modeling the impact of new parkrun events, and I'm going to put a bit more of a health economics lens on it, looking at efficiency versus equity of event location.
Hmm.
This is a project that so just to say, so yeah, I had a great bio. So I'm a postdoc fellow at University of Sheffield, but run a small company. And my primary focus at the moment in terms of research is shifting the field of kind of HEOR, health economics, away from Excel towards script-based programming languages, primarily because of the benefits in incorporating things like real-world data, having having outputs automatically update, and then having models more transparent and usable for decision makers. So things like having web apps to run models in real time, so that when decision makers are in a meeting, and clinicians, for example, disagree about certain parameters in the model, we don't need to go away and kind of rewrite a report and come back 2 weeks later. We can look at that directly in the meeting. I do have to apologize. My voice is dying a bit. So we've been we're on the third day of a conference, and we've met a ton of people. So my day job is very much focused on the health economics side. So we work with what's called ERGs to help review models that get submitted to bodies like NICE or CADTH or to the NHS in the UK, to help try and inform decision making about which pharmaceutical products or technologies get funded, and which are determined to not be cost effective or good use of resource. Thank you so much. And so, but my research objective is trying to shift, as I said, away from this process where we're using lots of different technologies to build these models to do statistical analysis uh, in one programming language like R, copy and paste things into Excel, put things into Word reports, and present things in PowerPoint, and move towards something that's a bit more seamless, like all in the same programming language, so that all of these are kind of R packages, what's referred to as R software packages, so that we can have reports and interfaces that update as new data comes in, so that decisions can be made quicker. The methods are more transparent, and we're able to share those with interested parties like members of the public, because we can separate the data from the code, and then able to kind of do sensitivity analyses and things with these user interfaces. Okay, so that's enough about myself. What I'm going to talk to about today is this really cool, what I think is really cool research collaboration we had during the period from 2019 through actually to the last paper, which was just published a couple of weeks ago. Um, and this research collaboration was between Parkrun, which I'll talk about in a minute, as some of you may know what Parkrun is, and the University of Sheffield. And it was primarily between myself and a PhD student, Paul Schneider. So I continued supervising him while he was doing his PhD. And actually, neither one of us incorporated this into our PhD. So there's four, well, I think it's really cool papers, but it wasn't really our primary focus. We were doing it as kind of a bit of pro bono work for Parkrun as a charity. But it's got a huge amount of interest as a kind of open source project, um, and other people have replicated across, in Australia, New Zealand, some of the work to make decisions there. So a bit of background about Parkrun for those of you who may not know what it is. So it's a free, timed weekly 5K run that takes place in local parks, and there are thousands of events worldwide. The the first event, and I can show you here the growth in the UK. We made a really basic looking plot, just to show what this growth was like. So back in 2004, the first event took place in Bushy Park. Um, and then it was a while before the next event sprang up. There was just a group of friends that used to meet for a run, time it. And then more events sprang up around London. And then gradually over time, an increasing number of these events were made. And you can see that over time in the UK, this kind of spreading as like almost like an epidemic of running. And more people took part in this. You can see it kind of gradually growing over time from 2004 all the way up. I think this goes to 2018. So I kind of let it run just to show the dots here show that the green dots are areas of low deprivation, socioeconomic deprivation, and the orange dots are areas of higher socioeconomic deprivation. So you can see it's kind of growing primarily in areas with low deprivation, so kind of more affluent areas. But you can see it kind of spreading throughout the whole country over time. So I'll pause it there and carry on the presentation. But so what happened was this was growing organically, kind of regardless, with no oh, sorry. Let me, sorry, I think let's get that. So this was growing organically, and with no sort of government funding. It was just volunteer funded. And the guy that set it up, Simon Love Hewitt, I believe his name is, was knighted recently. And just kind of set it up as a group of friends, and they kind of gradually, organically grew it through donations. But then Sport England kind of recognized the value of it, and in 2018 decided to collaborate to try and kind of pump a bit more investment in it to boost the number of events and participation in underrepresented areas. So in that visual I just showed, you could see that there was this kind of gradual growth across the country, but primarily in more affluent areas. And so what they were trying to do is locate these new events in areas that might not kind of originally have an event, and speed up that transition into less affluent areas. And so Paul and I published a series of papers and did a series of projects with Parkrun, looking at how they could best make use of this resource that they'd been given. And so the first three papers were in quite quick succession, essentially the same project. And this was during kind of Paul's like third year of his PhD. He was 2 years behind me, so I just finished. Or I was kind of mid PhD, end of PhD, and so we kind of did this alongside PhD and postdoc work, and found that Parkrun were able to give us really rich data. And I'll just go through kind of these in turn and what we were looking at in each case, finishing with the last one, which was published a couple of weeks ago. So the first paper we looked essentially at what the effect of what's referred to in the UK as ethnic density, which is portion non-white British, and socioeconomic deprivation have on access and participation in parkrun events. So what we were interested in was whether there was any kind of correlation, or whether it was a deprivation effect, or whether it was kind of essentially a sort of a middle class white activity to undertake. And we did find that there was kind of both things having an effect here, and we found that generally areas with higher deprivation had much lower participation rates, and areas with kind of lower ethnic density, so more white British, tended to have more a higher participation rate as well. So there's kind of two effects going on, independent of access, like distance to the nearest event. We then kind of extended that work to look at, well, how is this changing over time? And what we found really interesting and maybe a bit demoralizing was that the most deprived areas, the kind of relationship, the ratio was staying the same. So they were all growing roughly at the same rate, but that gap wasn't closing. So it's fantastic that they're all growing. The participation is going up in, even the most deprived area. We can see that by 2020, the most deprived areas had participation rates that were similar to the least deprived back in sort of 2013, 2014. But it's a slow, a kind of a slow growth there. And that ratio is staying the same. So the kind of relative inequalities is remaining. And that's really what Sport England, when they were pumping this money in, we're hoping to try and kind of reduce the gap between that red line there, the most deprived, and the green line at the top, the least deprived. And so then, given what we know about the proclivity of different populations to participate in the event, we could actually do something much more advanced. So rather than just looking at a descriptive analysis, we could look at where should these events occur, and Parkrun, because they'd provided this data to us on exactly which area had what participation in which run. We could do geospatial analysis and try and find the optimal park to locate the new events to either reduce the travel distance for individuals in the country to their nearest event, or using the model created for the previous publications to estimate the number of runs that a new event would create. And so what we used was a greedy search algorithm. And I'm not going to go through all the equations, but essentially what this is doing is it's searching through all of the different parks in the country and saying which park reduces the sum of the travel distance for the entire population the most. Let's put a park run in that park to increase access by the largest amount for the population overall. And then given that we put a park run in that park, where should we put the second park run? And then given that we put a park run in the second park, where should we put the third park run? And so we're able to give parkrun a list of 300 locations in which to 200 locations in which to put these new events and in rank order of priority by access, so just distance traveled as the crow flies. But then we're able to go one step further and say, so actually we can predict if you for each park in the country, how many runs is per year is it going to result in when we put a park run in that park? And so we're then able to give a rank order not only by access but by participation, number of runs generated. So just to show what this actually looks like in practice, because the equations are kind of a bit dry maybe. Sheffield, which is where I live, has had 5 events at the time we were doing the analysis. It actually has a 6th now, but at the time that we were doing the analysis, it had 5, and you can see those events as blue dots here. And what we did was we split up, and I mean we didn't split this up. This is how the ONS report its data in the UK. They report the populations and centroids of each what's called lower super output area. And a lower super output area contains roughly 2,000 to 3,000 people. So you can think of each of these polygons as an area that has roughly 2,000 people in it. And the black dots are the centroid of that polygon. So it's like the weighted centroid based upon where people live. So if you see this big polygon out here, like no one really lives over this side. All of the people live kind of over here, which is why this dot is towards the right of the polygon. And so what we were able to do is say, okay, so how good is the access here? And we were able to say from each of these black dots, what's the distance to the nearest parkrun? And so you can see these distances in purple. And then because we have this, we're able to say, okay, so let's put a new event in this purple location, which is a park in Sheffield. Let's put a new event there. What's the effect of doing that? And what it does is it shifts the distance. This group of people living here used to have to travel 5.1 kilometers. Now, with the new event, they only have to travel 2 kilometers. Now, obviously, I've only given one example there, but of course, we're summing this across, I think it's like 300,000 low super output areas in the country to 700 different parkrun events, and then calculating the access gain from that event.
Robert, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just feel free to jump in whenever.
Yeah, this is. I'm sure this is making Lauren Mitchell smile because she's been thinking about, where should public health events take place? How do you? What about the fact that maybe the same runners are just traveling to different places to do the park run, versus the actual local residents doing the running? Is
Yeah.
that something we just have to ignore, or that we just have to acknowledge, or that is one kind of a question I always have about geospatial stuff.
Yeah, so this is the question around the access versus the estimated participation, because when we do it by access, actually putting a new run in this location here that we're talking about is not, even though it's going to improve access the most, it might not actually improve participation the most because the people who live there may not want to do a run. Like there might not,
Right.
it's actually there might not be a run there in part because the people who live there, for whatever reason, like they didn't set one up as a community. Maybe as a community they prefer other sports. There's all kinds of reasons. Like maybe that's a really hilly park. There's all kinds of considerations here. Um, but yeah, we'll definitely touch on that later
Okay.
later on.
Really cool.
And so we can do this. Obviously, I've given this example. We've got just five run locations. We're adding a sixth, but of course, we can do this for the scales to the whole country. Like the same method works for the whole country, as I was saying, with 700 events. And I forget how many parks we had data on, but we had park data on all the green spaces in the country. And essentially, we just removed any green space that was smaller than like a running track size. So if the area of the green space is smaller than a running track, we felt it was infeasible to have a 5K event there. So like if you had a really small community park with like a little garden, like that was no good for running. So we got rid of those and kept anything that was kind of larger than an athletics track. Um, and so we are able to say, okay, so how does this improve access? But we're actually also able to say, how does this improve participation by plugging in our model that I discussed previously, where we're looking at what are the determinants of participation in terms of the uh, not only access, but the characteristics of the groups and their proclivity to do parkrun. We actually excluded ethnicity from that. So we only incorporated deprivation, socioeconomic deprivation, distance, uh, and I forget the other yeah, um, distance and deprivation, because we didn't want to essentially proliferate biases associated with ethnicity. Um, and that was kind of a preference of parkrun as well, not to incorporate that in there. And so Sheffield, if we draw out these polygons, this map in terms of access from these different lower super alpha areas, this is what it looks like. So this is just showing for each of those small polygons, how good is their access? What's the distance to the nearest event? So as you'd expect, near the blue dot, they've got great access. As you go away from the blue dot, you've got poor access. But we can compare that to deprivation. So uh, for those of you, I assume probably most of you have not been to Sheffield, but Sheffield is kind of in public health terms very much a tale of two cities. Back in the olden days, it was an industrial heartland, and they had huge factories right in the middle of town, and the prevailing wind is from west to east, and so the east side of the town tended to be covered in smoke a lot of the day from all the factory smoke. So that's where kind of the poorer workers lived, whereas the west side of the town tended to be more your kind of affluent landowners and factory owners. And so this is kind of continued, unfortunately. And so now there's this really stark contrast. So it actually serves as quite a good example and test case. Um, and so when we look at participation, we can now see that this map is showing what's the number of runs per 10,000 population in each one of those lower super alpha areas. And you can see that essentially you can see how closely it correlates with deprivation there. So most of the runners are on the west side of town. Um, and so we looked at overall how good is geographical access to parkrun, and the caveat to this is that this is as the crow flies. So it's not, we're not kind of plugged in access to like Google Maps or kind of street map technology. Although we would love someone to take what we've done, everything's open source, so we'd love to people to carry on developing it, and it would be quite simple to do. It just is is quite computationally burdensome, so we avoided doing it. But what we were able to say to Parkrun and what they used as they used one of these as a stat, which was something like 50% of the population, no, it's like 69% of the population are within a parkrun of a parkrun. So, which is pretty amazing, really. So 69% of the population will live within 5K of a 5K running event every Saturday morning. So as a public health success story, this is incredible. And actually 50% you can see there live within kind of 3K of an event. So it's kind of pretty much walkable slash joggable for a good chunk of the population. And actually access is surprisingly equitable. So you can see here that actually because levels of deprivation in cities is higher, and because typically more park runs locate in cities because population density encourages kind of sort of collaboration and community kind of engagement with events. You just got a higher population of people that would want to take part in something like this. Actually, access is better for those with those in more deprived communities. But as we've talked about, and as I've talked about, participation is way lower in the most deprived communities. So it's kind of how do we break this this effect in not engaging with parkrun, and that's what parkrun are really interested in. And they were also interested in, of course, yeah, how equitable is parkrun? So how can we break down some of these barriers? And is very much when we were talking to the parkrun leadership team, they were great in terms of like people don't have to come do a parkrun. Like it's fine if people have other sports they want to do, and if there's other reasons, then that's great. But everybody should feel welcome. And so they were really, really worried about like whether there was something they were doing, something about parkrun, the way it had grown organically, which was making it seem not welcoming, or if there's any problem like that, or anything they could do to make people feel like they could come. And so, but they've got these different concerns because, of course, they can locate an event in a park in the more deprived part of town, but that's going to generate less runs. And so there's a really difficult trade-off here, coming back to more of the health economics component and some of the things that we might have to think about, which is what are you trying to maximize? Are you trying to maximize access? Are you trying to maximize participation? And within participation, if you're trying to maximize participation, are you trying to maximize overall runs, overall engagement, or are you trying to maximize have some kind of like weighting on deprivation? And what is that weighting? And this is another instance where it's really hard with a decision maker to get a quantitative value on that. I mean, it's incredibly tricky to put a quantitative value on that. So we ended up just doing the work and kind of showing how these two things contrast. And we use one model where essentially we just weighted by deprivation squared, really crude, just to give some kind of indication. But I don't think we ever really fully solve this as an issue. What we'd need to do really is do a proper expert elicitation on the preference, the trade-off that the parkrun leadership team had between these two different competing goals. And then we kind of, we ran out of time essentially. So what we did build, and I say we, like as I mentioned throughout, I was working with Paul on this, and he's a fantastic developer, and he built this app, and we built this in 2020, so it's been running a while. So I can hopefully go to it and show you what it looks like. And it'll take a while to load because we've just got it on a free server system. But once it has loaded, hopefully I can talk through kind of how this actually looks in practice. This is actually pulling in quite a lot of data because obviously we've got all the parks in the country. So hopefully you can see this. If I zoom in, maybe I'll zoom into Sheffield just because I know the area. So as we said, here's the 5 events, and you can see those as blue dots. But then we can also see where the different green spaces we considered are. So here's the locations of all these events, or the options that we had, and then you can see the distance to the nearest event. So obviously the ones near the nearest event are green, and then as you come out, like this is the Peak District, the nature reserve, and these are kind of much further away from the nearest event. And you can see engagement, which is the parkrun participation, which is the map I showed before. So I'll turn those off just to make it easier to see. So let's put the parkruns back in. And then now we've got where should we locate our new runs? So let's minimize the total distances. And these are our recommendations. So you can see, actually, it's not really put many in Sheffield, but it said, Chesterfield, which is the town below Sheffield. That needs a run, basically. And it said it's ranked 31 in our list of 200 events that should be started. And it should be at Queen's Park Sports Centre. And actually, I think there is an event there now, which is kind of cool. And so we're able to see, so where does the event go when we minimize the total distances? But then where does the event go if we minimize distances weighted by IMD? And so that rank now changes to 48 because it's a slightly less deprived community. So the places that you would choose kind of change depending on what your priority is. So you notice this one down here in Clay Cross. If you don't weight by IMD, that's not included. This is likely a more deprived area, so it's given slightly more priority on the IMD weighted model. And so we can if I turn these back off, so that's for access. Whereas actually, if we want to maximize the total number of runs, again, this location does pretty well, which is probably why they ended up with an event there. But actually, there's other locations like Buxton, which is a relatively well-off area, has an event. And so you see that there's these different parkrun like kind of prioritization things. So you can see these for the whole country. So yeah, so we didn't have the same level of data for Wales and Scotland. So it's just kind of an England only analysis here. But you can see within London, like where would you put these events? So let's have a look. So minimizing distance there's less events in London versus minimizing runs slightly. It's and depends basically on where you want to put them based on the population. So yeah, so that's the app we built, and that kind of got us involved in like building these user interfaces to shape policy. We built a couple before for the WHO for various health economic models, but this is the first time building kind of quite a big developed map with a developed model inside. So that was the work we did back in 2020, and we made the whole thing open source, and it actually got replicated for, as I said, for Australia and New Zealand, which is really cool. So someone just took the code, threw in the park locations in Australia and the park because Australia has much of the same data sets for deprivation and locations for individuals, they were able to throw in essentially the same data, but just for Australia, and get the result pretty quickly, which is cool. So there's now the exact same replicated analysis, but for Australia. So if you want to have a look at that cites our earlier paper. But as Erin said in the intro, during the pandemic, I went to work for the UK government on pandemic policy, and so I got kind of interested in. I was very much focused on how do we set policy to not like overly burden the healthcare system to the point where we have patients waiting outside hospitals who can't be treated, and we end up with deaths that are essentially caused not just by the virus, but by the spillover effects of healthcare facilities being overwhelmed. So very much like most of my focus was on building models to not peak above a certain number of hospital occupancy. But I was always very conscious and interested in what are the side effects of some of these pandemic policies. Like what are we not capturing? And there wasn't that much consideration and kind of big picture health economic modeling going on. And so I did a load of stuff in government, and we published papers on the effects of test and trace and that kind of thing. But I wanted to publish this paper, and so we got a student, Oscar, who was great and part of the PhD program at Sheffield, to replicate essentially the analysis that we did for 2008 through to 2018, and extend that forward through the pandemic period. And you can see this graph here on the right is essentially just looking at the participation rates or weekly finishes per 1,000 residents in each of these areas by deprivation. and showing, okay, so this is what happened, and then we had the pandemic, and then we had no events. Parkruns were cancelled in the UK for over a year, and then after the pandemic, events reopened and things started again. And we thought we could get a pretty good crack at estimating what the effect of the pandemic was. So not just the lockdowns, but the pandemic, because of course, even if we hadn't of lockdown and had restrictions, people still would have been wary and wouldn't have gone to events. So it's not all lockdown effect, but it's the effect of the overall kind of pandemic, like what would have happened without the pandemic. And so I'm really conscious in the paper and the way we're wording things, not like to get back into that debate on lockdowns too much, but just to show that there is an unintended consequence of policies, and we might want to think carefully about what we do with outdoor events in the future. So this is the graph just a bit bigger. So you see that the events kind of suddenly stop in 2020, March 2020, in the UK, and restart again, I think, in July 2021. So the black line there is just the number of events that occurred that week, and the kind of fluctuation there is sometimes, a park is hosting some other event and it gets cancelled, or there's snow or something, which means that events are cancelled, which is why it's not a constant number. But you see that gradually over time we're getting up to 600 events. But the areas with low deprivation have really high weekly finishes per 1,000 residents, but this dropped to nothing during the pandemic and really didn't recover very well afterwards. So we did some longitudinal analysis and interrupted time series analysis to estimate what do we think would have happened had the pandemic not occurred. Like, what was the trajectory of runs? And so what we show with the dotted line is the no seasonality. So it's just kind of the central estimate through there. But what's actually used for in the paper for the final calculations is an autoregressive model that kind of captures the fluctuation by month across the year. But just for simplicity to show this, we essentially say this is what we think would have happened. Of course, we don't know exactly, but that trajectory seems pretty stable from 2014 through to 2020. And then the pandemic hit, and obviously there was nothing for a year and a half, but people were kind of expecting that everybody would be desperate to come back and, like get engaged with the community and run. But as you see, there's a pretty stark drop off there that just didn't catch back up, didn't recover at all.
Robert,
And yep.
just a quick question about the measure here, the left vertical axis. Is that the location of the run or the location where the resident lives?
That's the location where the resident lives. Yeah. So we
Okay,
had data. We had data.
So these like the bottom quintile there, they're people who live in deprived areas who are probably transiting to places less deprived, right? For in order to access a run, because the runs tend to be in the more or in the less deprived areas.
So access is pretty similar between deprived and
Oh, it
non-deprived.
is.
So there are runs in more deprived areas, but just fewer people tend to do them. Yeah, and actually what you find is strange because participation rates are so much higher in people who live in less deprived areas, more affluent areas. What you find is when you put an event in a more deprived community, a new event in a more deprived community, you actually get more people from the affluent area travel to the deprived area, which is really surprising.
Yeah, that's
So
really interesting. Yeah, because I was thinking about, what is how does demand respond when there's a new when a new event opens, and I was thinking that if all of your information on that had been in less deprived areas, then it'd be hard to extrapolate to the more deprived areas. But it sounds like there actually have been a fair amount of openings in the more deprived areas.
yeah, and because
Uh,
we have the data on
okay.
literally the postcode, so like that lower super output area, which is a really small area geographically, we can just see where individuals are and which run they're going to each week. And so the lines here are the actual individual's residential socioeconomic status rather than the status of the run that they go to.
Cool. Thanks.
So, Robert, in Chicago, I was trying to find park runs in the Chicago area, and I think there have been only a couple. But the classic place to do a 5K or even like longer distances is basically along the lake on the east
Yeah.
side of the city. Um, but what you've described is I don't know. You just basically you basically you can see the you can see the participation actually from basically there's a 5K every weekend basically along the lake.
Yeah.
But so I participated in the last couple of years in a race called the Gospel Run, which is organized by Black churches, and the attendance in that is incredibly low. The number of participants running in that race are it's incredible. It's the same exact location. There may be some greater distance traveled, but participation is really low. And then you have like basically these majority 5K races like there's literally one organized around hot chocolate. And those have thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
So it's just such a uh, it's another way to show kind of the sort of disparities in kind of physical activity or in participation in sports.
Yeah, and we were kind of uncertain on that topic because we didn't necessarily want to make a claim that participation in physical activity overall was lower. I suppose we couldn't quite make that claim because it could actually just be that certain communities, and that's part of the reason for looking at the ethnicity, is that and actually there's data on this in the UK, so it breaks down by different ethnicities. So you could actually do this analysis by
Oh yeah,
specific
that
ethnicities.
yeah.
And my suspicion is actually when we talk to people at Parkrun, just like in the UK anyway, different ethnicities tend to prioritize different sports. So
Oh okay. So you think it
we have a
might
lot.
be
Sorry, go on.
the different ethnic groups are just doing different or they made more football and less
Yeah, I think
running.
so.
Um, but
So
it does raise a question about whether a 5K is how much is that a signal of overall
yeah.
physical activity and wellness for a population.
Yeah, and they did. So Sport England did do a survey. They do a survey every year on which sports people are doing, and they include ethnicity in there.
Mhm.
So we can see not only what sports, how much, and which sports people are doing, and compare that with ethnicity between ethnic groups. And so we know that different ethnic groups like uh, do different sports. Like this is kind of well known.
Yeah.
But the what was interesting is the kind of um, confirmed our findings here that essentially across sports, people were doing less sport post-pandemic. Um, and yeah, that's obviously a big problem. So it's not just parkrun. We're showing this for parkrun only, which is only part of the picture. But Sport England was able to show it like across the board
Yeah.
based on survey data, that it's not just parkrun, it's not just recreational running, it's other sports as well. And kind of my sort of assumption and takeaway from this is it's most likely what's been lost uh, is the community aspect, that those networks
Mm,
of people who may know each other through parkrun and also the habit. So when in the paper we kind of discuss um, whether it's potential reasons, and we include things like once you form a habit to do something at 9 a.m. every Saturday morning, kind of becomes like a thing that you do, and when you take that away for a year, it takes a while for people to get that habit back. But also you've got these community kind of groups,
yeah.
and that social fabric has kind of broken down a bit by the break. And the hope is that it will gradually build back up, and things will go back to normal. But it's an interesting kind of side effect of the policy. Cool. So yeah, almost finished. So yeah, this has been replicated, and actually what we've done is because we're involved in some what's called repro hacks. So we've made everything open source so people who are interested can go away and try and rerun this analysis and adapt it and change it. And so there's these hackathon sessions that run in the UK where people kind of take code from published studies, and the ReproHack website's got like, I don't know, hundreds of studies. So you can go on there and try and reproduce stuff. So we provide all the data. We don't provide the granular data for like which parkrun each person went to, but we provide the data for the overall participation by lower super alpha area. So you can reproduce the analysis that's in these two papers. And actually you can reproduce the analysis from all four. All the code's open source. And just one example, so Parkrun was nicely gave us a statement around you know a couple of parks where they had actually introduced runs that they wouldn't have otherwise found. It was just like a higher rank on our rank, and they weren't otherwise considering it. So they worked with community groups, found the location, and put these new events in. And really bad luck, I guess, that we were doing this kind of right before the pandemic. So they got a couple of these events in, and then the pandemic hit and nothing really happened. So I might have to email them and see like how many of the 200 we gave them they actually did in the end. But my suspicion is they like a lot of them they knew about anyway. But when we talked to them, they said, oh, actually, like okay, like half of them we had in we were bearing those in mind anyway. But there were some that surprised them. And then this one obviously they've gone for. So I'll share the slides afterwards. So these are the publications, and all the code is open source on GitHub for every publication with the data as well. So they can all be good. But yeah, and I always promote our courses because I'm a greedy capitalist. So if you are interested in anything modeling R based, then feel free to check those out. So cool. I'll stop sharing.